So I'm going to take you back in time, 1400 years, to the city of Medina, Saudi Arabia, to a time when Prophet Muhammad was given the task of finding a solution to women in the city being attacked and molested. The situation was this. It was around the year 600 AD, long before the modern convenience of plumbing. And when a woman awoke in the middle of the night with the urge to relieve herself, she would have to walk out past the outskirts of the city and into the wild by herself for privacy. Believe it or not, a group of men actually began to see an opportunity in women's nightly treks and started to linger at the outskirts of the city, their identities hidden in the dark, watching. If a woman walked by and she happened to be wearing a jilbab, which was a garment like a coat, the men knew to leave her alone. A jilbab of centuries ago was a status symbol, like a Burberry trench or a Chanel jacket. It announced that the woman was free, and a free woman was protected by her clan. She would have no problem speaking out against the attacker and identifying him. But if the woman walking out at night wasn't wearing a jilbab, if she happened to be dressed a bit more freely, then the men knew she was a slave, and they attacked her. Concerned members of the community brought the situation to the Prophet, and like so many other social, political, and familial issues that Muhammad faced during his prophethood, he turned this particular matter over to God. And a verse was revealed for the Quran, the Muslim holy book. "O Prophet," it reads, "tell your wives, your daughters, and the women of the believers to draw upon themselves their garments. This is better, so that they not be known and molested." Basically, the verse advises that all women dress similarly, so that they can't be picked out from one another, zeroed in on, and attacked. Now, on the surface, this may seem like a relatively easy solution to the problem, but it turns out it wasn't. The early Muslim community was tribal and so deeply entrenched in social status, and the idea that a slave would look like a free woman, it was almost insulting. And then there was the matter of practicality. How would a slave do her work? How would she function if her body was constricted by a coat? How would she cook, clean, fetch water? In the end, the early Muslim scholars ruled that a woman's way of dress should be based on two considerations: a woman's function in society, her role, what we might consider her job, and the society's specific customs. Or, in another way, when in Rome. Now, Muslims like to take historical rulings and apply them to the modern era. So let's do that. A woman's way of dress should be based on custom and function. So what does that mean for a Muslim woman living in America today? For someone like me? First, it means that I have a function, a role in society, a contribution that I can make. Second, it means that while I'm making that contribution and living in a society where veiling is not the custom, and where, in fact, if I veil, it might actually lead to harassment, then wearing what is the custom, such as a dress, a pair of jeans, or even yoga pants, is not only acceptable, it's recommended. But wait, could that be right? After all, haven't we all come to assume that a Muslim woman must veil, that veiling is a requirement of her faith? There's even a term that we've all come to associate with the Muslim woman's veil, an Arabic term that we've all heard used whether or not we've been aware of it: hijab. So maybe I missed it. Maybe the requirement that a woman veil is in a different part of the Quran. For those of you who don't know, the Quran consists of 114 chapters. Each chapter is written out in verses, like poetry. There are more than 6,000 verses in the Quran. Of the 6,000 plus verses, 3 refer to how a woman should dress. The first is the verse I've already told you about. The second is a verse that directly speaks to the prophet's wives, asking that they begin to dress a bit more modestly because of their role, their function in society as his wives. And the third verse is similar to the first in that it was revealed in direct response to a historical situation. Early records show that the custom, the fashion during the pre-Islamic era was for women to wear a scarf on the head called a khimar, which would be tucked behind the ears and allowed to flow behind the back. In the front, a woman wore a tight vest or a bodice, which she left open, exposing her breasts, sort of like the images you see in Game of Thrones. When Islam spread through the Arabian Peninsula, a verse was sent down asking that women use this scarf or any other garment to cover the breasts. And that's it. That's basically all there is in the Quran concerning how a woman should dress. Turns out, God doesn't give a bullet point of all the parts on a woman's body that he wants hidden from view. And in fact, it might be argued, and it is argued. I cannot stress enough that it is argued by many Muslim scholars that the reason these verses were left intentionally vague is so that a woman could choose for herself how to dress according to her specific culture and the progression of time. And that term hijab, guess what? It's not in any of these three verses. In fact, it's nowhere in the Quran directly meaning a woman's veil. That's not to say that the word doesn't appear in the Quran, because it does appear. But when it appears, it's actually used correctly to mean a barrier or a divide, such as the barrier or divide that exists between us humans and the divine, or between believers and non-believers, or it means a barrier like a physical screen that men during Muhammad's time were asked to stand behind when speaking to his wives, or it means the seclusion, the separation that Mary sought when she was giving birth to Jesus. That separation and seclusion, that means hijab. That physical screen, that means hijab. That barrier, that divide, that means hijab. Hijab doesn't mean a woman's veil. And yet, isn't it strange that what the term actually means, being screened off, divided away, barred, separated out, these are the very terms that come to our minds when we think of a Muslim woman? Why shouldn't they? We have all seen the way some Muslim women are treated around the world. If she attempts to go to school, she's shot in the head. If she attempts to drive a car, she's jailed. If she attempts to take part in the political uprisings happening in her own country to be heard, to be counted, she's publicly assaulted. Forget about hiding out in the dark at the outskirts of a city. Some men now feel comfortable enough to assault a woman on the sidewalk for the world to see. And they don't care to hide their identities. They're more interested in making international headlines. They're too busy making videos and uploading them onto YouTube, bragging about what they've done. Why don't they care to hide their crimes? They don't feel like they've committed any crimes. It's the women who've committed the crimes. It's the women who got these funny ideas in their heads, ideas that actually led them out of the house, led them into society, believing that they can make a contribution. And we all know honorable women, they stay at home. Honorable women stay invisible, just as it was the custom for honorable women to do during the Prophet's time. Is that true? 1400 years ago is long before feminism. Were women locked away behind doors, screened off by veils? Well, it turns out that the Prophet's first wife was what we would define today as a CEO. She was a successful merchant whose caravan equaled the caravans of all the other traders put together. She essentially headed up a successful import-export company. When she hired Muhammad to work for her, she was so taken with his honesty that eventually she proposed. I'm not sure how many women feel comfortable proposing marriage to a man today. And Muhammad's second wife, she was no slacker either. She rode into battle on the back of a camel, which is equivalent to a woman riding into battle today inside of a Humvee or a tank. And what of the other women? Early records show that women demanded to be included in the Islamic revolution taking place around the Prophet. One woman became famous as a general when she led her army of men into battle and crushed a rebellion. Men and women freely associated with one another, exchanged gifts. It was custom for a woman to select her own husband and propose. And when things didn't work out, to initiate divorce. Women even loudly debated with the Prophet himself. Seems to me that if fundamentalists want to return current Muslim society to 600 AD, it might be a huge step forward. Progress. But we still have to answer an important question. If not from Islamic history, and if not from the Quran, how is it that we in the modern era have come to associate Muslim women with hijab, with being separated out from society, secluded and isolated, barred from the most basic human rights? I hope it's not any surprise to you that this isn't by accident. For the past few decades, the very people who have been given the important task of reading and interpreting the Quran in a variety of different Muslim communities, certain clerics have been inserting a certain meaning into those 3 verses concerning women. For instance, that verse I told you about earlier. O Prophet, tell your wives, your daughters, and the women of the believers to draw upon themselves their garments. This is better, so that they not be known and molested. Some clerics, not all, some clerics have added a few words to that, so that in certain translations of the Quran, that verse reads like this. O Prophet, tell your wives, your daughters, and the women of the believers to draw upon themselves their garments. Parentheses. A garment is a veil that covers the entire head and the face, the neck, the breasts, all the way down to the ankles and all the way to the wrists. Everything on a woman's body is exposed except for one eye, because she must see where she is headed. And the hands must be covered in gloves. Because, of course, there were certainly a lot of gloves back in the desert of Saudi Arabia. Etc., 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 on and on and on, end of parentheses, so that she not be known and molested. And what these so-called clerics have concluded, based on these types of insertions, is that a woman only has one function. To understand what that function is, all you have to do is read some of the fatwas, or legal rulings, that these so-called clerics have actually gone ahead and issued. Let me give you a sampling. A woman need only finish elementary school before she gets married, which puts her what? At the ripe old age of 11, 12 years old. A woman cannot fulfill her spiritual obligations to God until she first fulfills her physical obligations to her husband. If he desires her while she sits on the mount of a camel, she should submit. Islam has forbidden a woman from wearing a bra because bras lift up and make a woman appear younger. And this is calculated deception. My personal favorite. If a man has an ulcer excreting pus from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet, and she licked it for him, she would still not fulfill what she owes him. What these and the many other rulings just like it concerning women boil down to is this: the best of women, the most honorable among them, is uneducated and so powerless, not very different from a slave. So she remains at home without complaint, without a bra, ready and available at all times to satisfy his every whim, even if it's to lick his entire body. Satisfying him whenever he calls, whether it's in his bed or on the mount of a camel. Does this sound like God's will to you? Does this sound like Scripture? Or does this sound strangely, uncomfortably erotic, like the worst kind of misogynist fantasy? Are these so-called clerics and the fundamentalists and extremists who support them truly purifying Islam from within, bringing it back to its intended form? Or are these men no different from those men standing out in the dark at the outskirts of the city, eager to prey upon a woman? Thank you.